Hello, and you join me now in the Honda BR-V to answer one important question. You see, the BR-V is no longer alone in the small 7-seat crossover market. You now have the Toyota Rush and the Mitsubishi Xpander. So the question now is this: is the BR-V still any good? Now, I've spent quite some time in the Rush and the Xpander already, and I will tell you this: the BR-V strikes a nice middle ground between the two. It's a bit firmer compared to the Xpander, but a whole lot comfier than the Rush. So points to Honda for that. To drive, well, it's pretty conventional. It's not going to be exciting in any way, shape, or form, but then again, this is a 7-seat family hauler. So driving dynamics isn't exactly its top priority. Of course, that doesn't mean it's not a great handler. In fact, it handles the road pretty well. Although, again, it's not going to set your hair on fire. But it is safe, secure, and it won't be daunting to drive. Ride is well composed, well enough, considering they had to stiffen up the back. And these seats, they look thin, but they are reasonably comfortable. Just needs a little bit more lumbar support. If there's anything Honda could work on a bit, it's noise isolation. The BR-V can get a little noisy when you're seated at the back. Here in front, it's totally fine, but if you're occupying the second or third row, you're gonna hear a bit more of the road. But other than that, for a small SUV, it's pretty well refined. And you have to remember, that price tag is very lucrative. Now, the BR-V's primary purpose is to carry 7 people. And that means the handling is, to be honest, totally unexciting. But that's fine, because that means it's totally safe and secure, and it won't be daunting to drive, whether day or night, or dry or wet, and all that. Great visibility out these large windows, and the steering is very, very light. A little too light for those looking for a bit of a thrill while driving, but it should be good enough for just about everyone else. Now, when it comes to performance, you could say it's adequate, and none of these cars in this segment, be it this, the Rush, or the Xpander, will ever be called what you think of speed demons. They're none of that. But it is adequate nonetheless. It's got 120 horsepower under the hood after all, and it's easily the most powerful among the 3. That does benefit when you're carrying a lot of people and you have to go uphill. So going up hills, the BR-V is relatively effortless. I say relatively because, again, you're limited by 120 horsepower. Of course, that doesn't mean it's totally slow either. You could get up to highway speeds with a relative amount of ease, although that CVT is going to drone on a bit. But if you don't mind that, well, the BR-V is good for the highway as well. Couple with that smooth ride, and you have yourself a decent cruiser. The BR-V is neither fast nor exciting, but again, I have to reiterate this, it's not the main purpose of this car. In fact, fuel economy would be more important for shoppers of this kinds of vehicles. And the BR-V delivers on that front pretty well. Around the city, you're looking at about 9.5 to 11.5 kilometers per liter, and out on the highway, you're looking at about 16 to 17 kilometers per liter, of course, depending on the driving conditions. So where does this leave the BR-V with all these impressions? Again, I will say that it stands in the middle between the Xpander and the Rush. The Rush is a slightly better polished product on the basis that it's newer. Although, I would say it's better executed than the Rush on the basis that it's more comfortable, a bit quieter, and slightly better equipped. Now, I would say that the BR-V held up its looks even over a year since it was first launched. Now, mobilio roots are still evident, particularly with this rear door with a kink. Of course, they made a few changes by adding a bit of cladding, unique set of alloy wheels, this taller roof rail to go along with it. Gives it a more SUV look as Honda persists. At the front though, it's much more different. Clamshell hood, angular edges give it a butch look. And with this mobilio kit, it impedes a bit on the ground clearance, although not by much. Now let's go check out the back. Like the front, the rear treatment of the BRV is totally unique compared to the Mobilio. So you have these wraparound taillights which sort of remind me of a Ray-Ban Galant, and they move the license plate from up here to down low here. Of course, that benefits from a low lift-over height, meaning you don't have to haul up your groceries that up high to load stuff in the trunk. And speaking of which, let's take a look at what's inside. With the third row in place, there's enough space here for a couple of overnight bags or a small cooler. Of course, you could flip these forward for more space, like so. Now mind you, it doesn't fold flat, so you're never totally going to have a flat loading bay. But still, that low lift over means you could just slide items in and out with ease. So while we're looking at the cargo bay, what about we move to the front? Now this is the S version, and they actually came up with a pretty neat idea for manual climate control. As you can see, it's all digital. Now unlike other cars that have a manual rotary dial, this has all push buttons, so you actually feel like you have an automatic climate control. Also, the gauges and dials are lifted straight out of a Honda City, although the difference is the speedometer only goes up to 180. Then again, you wouldn't go that fast in here, would you? Loads of storage spaces. You have 2 cup holders, 4 bottle holders, a slot down here right below the radio, and of course that large cargo area. Now, if there's one thing I wish Honda would add, it would be this. Please, Honda, put seat height adjusters on the BRV, and the same goes for the Mobilio. Now in our past reviews, I've usually set the front seat in my driving position. So this is what it looks like when I'm seated at the back. But of course, it's different if you put a much taller adult inside. Miko? Now, with a taller adult in front of me, you can see there's still a pretty fair amount of room here. And do take note that this sliding second row seat isn't pushed all the way back. This is actually 3 clicks forward. So that means there's enough room in front, here in the second row, and even the third row. And let's go check that out. Now, see what I mean about fair amount of room here in the third row? Now, it's not the most commodious, but given the BRV size, this is actually not bad. I still have a fair amount of toe room and headroom here. Although do note that this space is still best reserved for small adults, much like myself. We've said it before, and we'll say it again. The BRV is still a good, small 7-seat SUV, and it's as good as it was, well, about a year ago. Granted, there's new competition, and there are some things the BRV doesn't do as well. Of course, on the flip side, it does things pretty good too, which the other competitors don't. Of course, that doesn't mean anything with just this one around. I'm sure you'd want to see the other two pitched against this one. Watch this space. We might just have something for you soon.